Welcome, welcome, welcome. On behalf of the Center for Transformative Action, we are so glad you are here enjoying these tunes. And right now, I'd like to welcome Kanyon Coyote woman, Sayers-Roods of Indian Kanyon Mutsun, band of Costanoan Ohlone people to help us open this conference in the right way and honor the land. Kanyon, thank you for being here.
Thank you. Meet Tuhis, Countercot Canyon, Coyote Woman, Sayers-Roods. I come from Indian Canyon Nation, daughter of tribal chairwoman Anne Marie Sayers, and I identify as a Mutsun Ohlone educator, consultant, activist, community member who focuses my work on honoring truth and history. So I am honored to be here to share space with everyone. And it's so very important that we acknowledge the land that we are on. So I recommend, or if you can look up hashtag honor native land, there's a cheat code, a little educational resource called native-land.ca. And you could look up your location and find out what linguistic territory or what tribal territory you are in. And this organization is always honoring truth and history. So they even offer a disclaimer that we're all learning and it's not perfect. So I recommend you throw into the comments what territory you're in if you check out that website. So I am here today to acknowledge and honor Indigenous protocol. By becoming familiar with the Indigenous peoples of whose land we are on, by honoring truth and history about these spaces and places in today's post-colonial settler environment, we are taking steps to honor the ancestors of the original stewards. And by coming into community together, my mother and my grandmother, who come from a matrilineal, matriarchal society, have always taught me and always believed that when song, ceremony, and dancing stops, so does the earth. I too believe that. And so I want to offer a grandmother song to honor our grandmothers, their grandmothers, and in all Mother Earth. For without them and without her, we would not be here. We share this time and space together for a reason. So it's with that humility, that gratitude, that present-mindedness that I offer this song here in this space today. And I'm going to use my regalia because Indigenous peoples, we don't wear costumes. And at the end of the song, our words to let prayers out or words of affirmation, similarly to how some community members say amen or ashe or blessed be. Our community, we say, oh, you are more than welcome to join me in that. If we were in person, the first thing I'd say on the microphone is, if you can hear me, can I hear you say, oh, and just raise the spirits of everyone. I can't hear that right now, but I know you're here together with me. And so this is Kanyon's grandmother song to honor our grandmothers, their grandmothers, and in all Mother Earth. For without them and without her, we would not be here. We share this time and space together for a reason. So it's with that humility, that gratitude, that present-mindedness that I offer this song here in this space. And so this is Kanyon's grandmother song. My Moi moi yo kawan, oh moi moi yo go, moi moi no, moi moi yo go, moi moi yo na yo konale, moi moi hey yo konale. Oh, the big oh. No son in breath, so it is in spirit. It's really important to take these steps because when you think about it, if we honor all of our ancestors, all of our elders and our ancestors' ancestors, all of our ancestors have indigenous lineages from the land that they come from, and we can honor our own indigeneity. We are all Ama Piritakawas. In my language, in the Mutsun dialect, Ama Piritakawas means people of this land. And when we are all together, we can take steps to honor truth and history, to acknowledge the original peoples of this land. And so, if we were gathered in San Francisco, I would say, welcome to Yelamu. The first language of this land is Ramaytush. If we gather in the East Bay, Oakland, Berkeley, I would say, welcome to Huchin. The first language of this land is the Chichenyo dialect. There are over 3 active indigenous communities just in the East Bay. We have the Confederated Villages of Lishan, the Muwekma tribe, and Himrin. Back in San Francisco, we have the Association of the Ramaytush Ohlone peoples. If you come down south to where I'm at right now, I am in Mutsun Ohlone territory, and this is my homeland where my ancestors have always been from. And there are 3 groups. There's the Ama Mutsun tribal band, my cousins in San Juan Bautista. I think there's another Mutsun band as well. And then our group, the Indian Kanyon Mutsun band. There are so many indigenous groups, and many people do not think we exist. They do not think that we are here. They don't consider what does it mean to acknowledge native land. And it's a form of indigenous protocol. And today we follow protocols all the time. Like, if you wanted to borrow a cup of sugar from your neighbor, would you just walk right into their kitchen and take it? That's burglary. What do? Oh, we find out if they're home and engage in a consensual interaction, such as seeking permission to be in their territory by knocking on the door, finding out if they're home, finding out if we can have a consensual, engaging dynamic to find out if they do have sugar and if they're willing to offer or let us borrow or let us have some. And that interaction is a protocol, or the action to do so is following a protocol. Now, indigenous peoples, we don't have fences and walls everywhere, but indigenous peoples, all of us come from place-based peoples and languages and territories. All of us know where our ancestors come from, and all of our communities today have been deeply impacted by colonization. And so, taking steps to decolonize, as well as to re-indigenize our approaches to coming together in community, to recognizing the rights of nature and our kinship to nature. Not only thinking about how our actions and our words impact ourselves or our families or our communities or even our environment, but the next 7 generations in the future. Think about how your words and actions will impact going forward. So I am so honored to share space here. I am happy to open this place, this gathering in a good way. We're digital, we're attempting to be safe and sound. You're amazing beings for coming. And let us all honor truth and honor past future by having land acknowledgements one step, learn about the native people. So let's be Ama Piritakawas, people of this land who are here together. So let's have a beautiful day today. So I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. Thank you for a beautiful acknowledgement, and thank you for the history lesson. Good morning, everyone, and good afternoon to those of you who are joining us from East Coast. At our last event, we had people from a handful of different countries. So wherever you are, greetings, and thank you for joining us. My name is Karniouchina, and I am the Dean of the Laurier-Lockheed School of Business and Public Policy. And it's my distinct pleasure to welcome all of you to our 13th annual Thought Leadership Conference. This year, the conference is titled Unfinished, Actualizing an Intersectional Anti-Racist Future. This theme was identified, as usual, by polling our students and finding what they're passionate about and what themes they want to explore this year. So it's not surprising that the issue of building an anti-racist world bubbled up to the top. For the past 13 years, the Lockheed School and its center kept us and our community on the cutting edge of the emerging and creative ways to solve problems and to partner across different sectors. Originally branded as CSRB, or the Center for Socially Responsible Business, the center tackled the ideas of triple bottom line and looked at ways of dealing with the climate crisis, ignited our students' interest in new business models. Back then, they were B Corps and CDFIs, and they ignited our passion for reaching new goals when it comes to equity. We also serve as a platform for sharing best practices when it comes to reducing equity gap in its various forms. About 3 years ago, under the direction of Professor Durcell Lahr and her CTA team at the time, the center was rebranded and became known as the Center for Transformative Action, to reflect the fact that transforming this traditional business model and relying on just one lever of reforming for-profit businesses was clearly not enough, and we had more levers at our disposal on how we could create a more equitable world. Today, the center is more focused on our efforts in the Lockheed community. It seeks to collaborate with a wide range of stakeholders, including community members, for-profit, non-profit, and community organizations, and local governments. It's evident in this year's theme that the center always also shifted toward more emphasis on racial and gender equity. It embraced ideas of intersectionality, and it continues to be an effective platform for finding creative partnership ideas and sharing best practices between our community members. You will meet some amazing people today. We have over 30 thought leaders lined up for you who are ready to share their wisdom and share their experiences with you. It is my hope that you will leave this conference with new ideas, new friends, and more importantly, the list of actionable items that will allow us to collectively move the needle on creating more equitable organizations, more equitable communities, and more equitable world. Over the years, close to a dozen Lockheed School faculty members assumed the lead role in organizing this conference and lending their unique lens, talents, and expertise to creating a series of truly remarkable and highly memorable events. CSRB conference was the highlight of my year before. The CTA conference is the highlight of my year now. This is the time of the year when we bring back our alums, when some former faculty members come back to reconnect with our community. We reconnect with the friends of the school, with our guest speakers, with the member of our broader community. And it's a true joy to experience this conference together. While the future of Mills is highly uncertain at the moment, and the future of Loki School as well, we're hoping to continue to be part of these important conversations going forward. And in the hope that we can weather these organizational challenges and come up with creative ways to keep our momentum going. We're so glad to see all of you here. We appreciate you showing up for our students, for our faculty, and for our staff. They need your support right now, so thank you for being here. So this event, of course, would not be possible without our sponsors. And this year, the conference was supported by a range of organizations. Some organizations that supported us over the years, and some of our new sponsors that came about to support this effort. So I would like to mention HubSpot Educational Partner Program, also Change Consulting, our two sponsors that have been stuck with us through the years, the Port of Oakland and the Beneficial State Bank. I would like to especially mention the Great Place to Work, an organization that is led by one of the former faculty members of the Loki School, Michael Bush. In one of the conferences a while back, Michael was joking that not only was he charged the $40 admission fee to participate in this conference, he was also asked to moderate the panel. So the stakes are higher this year. So Michael Bush is our official keynote this year. So he was asked to be the gold level sponsor for the conference. So thank you, Michael. Thank you for coming back. And you're right. At Mills, the business model is we are making you work for us, and the harder you work for us, the more you pay. So thank you for your generous contribution to this conference. I would also like to recognize Marquetta, the Rockham nonprofit workforce recruitment, Include Ventures, Linked Faced Strategies, List of Bay Area, the Alliance for Community Development, the Bay Area chapter of Conscious Capitalism, the She Can organization that stands with sponsoring her education changes the nation, and Rise Up. Finally, the stipends for the students working on organizing this conference were covered by the Irvine Foundation this year. I would like to also note that the enormous amount of work that goes into this conference are being done by the faculty, student, alums, and volunteers to ensure that our conference is a success. So this year, I would like to thank Carrie Maultsby-Lute. Carrie is an alumna, an MBA alumna of the Loki School, and she is also the director of our Center for Transformative Action. As a marketing professional and educator, Carrie is passionate about nurturing the next generation of business leaders and entrepreneurs. With 12 years of experience in marketing, education, and sales, Carrie brings industry-relevant experience and her multi-sector partnership experience into making sure that we get multiple perspectives at this conference. Whether you believe that we should completely dismantle the current systems of commerce and government, or you believe in reforming them, or you believe in different approaches to tackling the same problems, there will be different voices that will be heard at this conference. Carrie also has the team of students and alums helping her with this conference. And I would like to recognize the core team of students, which is this year, it's Patty Martinez and Alana Guth, who are our current students, and also our alumna, Ali Shagistar, who came back to help us organize this conference and promote our efforts. Carrie and her team have prepared an amazing program for you. So over the next couple of days, whatever your passions are, you've seen the long list of sessions. You will find something interesting for you. The program looks amazing. I am impressed. I can't wait to participate in many sessions of this conference. So I would like to welcome Carrie to the stage next. So Carrie and the team, please take it away.
Good morning. Thank you, Kate. Thank you so much for sharing the history of our center and for being our sage leader at the Lori I. Loki School of Business and Public Policy, and for highlighting why this convening is so important. Hello, everyone, and thank you, Kanyon, Coyote, Woman, Sayers-Roods of the Indian Kanyon Mutsun band of Costanoan, Ohlone people, for helping us open right with a beautiful honoring of the Ohlone land where many of us live, work, and play as guests. Many thanks to DJ Ome. We are so fortunate to have you bring in the music, positive vibes. We are going to party over the next 2 afternoons. I want to welcome you all, the audience. Thank you for coming to our 13th annual Thought Leadership Conference. My name is Carrie Maultsby-Lute. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm the director here at the Center for Transformative Action at Mills College. We are so happy you're here. 800 plus people are registered for this event that's going to span 2 days, and we have 70 speakers from across Oakland and beyond joining. You are here because you know that we deserve a better world, a world that works for all people. This isn't radical, but it's really humane. We need a world that embraces all people of differing ethnicities, races, gender identities, cognitive and physical differences, religious affiliations, and intersectionalities. So I know you're tired of hearing the fact that we live in unprecedented, uncertain times, and that we've all experienced trauma over the last year, but it's true. And so we've witnessed, but at the same time of this trauma that we're experiencing, we've witnessed the historic inauguration of Vice President Kamala Harris, global racial justice movements that span the globe, and really highlighted the solidarity that does exist already amongst us. We are the majority. We have an historic opportunity upon us, an opportunity to truly move from actualizing from reimagining the future to actually actualizing this. So that's the work that we're here to do today. We are here today to learn from leading experts in their field, grassroots organizers, social entrepreneurs, corporate executives, artists, policymakers, community members, and more as they engage in dialogue and share ideas and models surrounding some of our community's most pressing problems. I want to thank our sponsors. Kate did a fabulous job of doing that earlier, so I'm not going to name all of them, but without your generous donations, this would not have happened, so thank you so much. As noted previously as well, the CTA team, Lean, Mean, Dream Team, thank you so much for all you do. And I'll acknowledge you all in person or individually later in the day. And please check out the booths of our sponsors and other community organizations. And finally, what you all are here waiting for is Heather McGhee, amazing, inspiring leader that she is. I'm going to give a little bit of background about Heather and then welcome her to the stage so we can learn more about her and her very important work. So Heather designs and promotes solutions to inequality in America. Her new book, The Sum of Us, What Racism Costs Everyone and How We Can Prosper Together, is now a bestseller. Her 2020 TED Talk, Racism Has a Cost for Everyone, reached 1 million views in just 2 months. In the coming year, she will launch an original podcast on how to create cross-racial solidarity in challenging times. Heather has testified in Congress, drafted legislation, and developed strategies for organizations and campaigns that won changes to improve the lives of millions. She helped build the nonpartisan think and do tank, Demos, serving 4 years as the president. Through her media appearances, she elevates the concerns of working families. She is the chair of the board of Color of Change, the country's largest online racial justice organization. We are so happy to welcome Heather McGhee to the stage. My request for you all as audience members who may or may not have heard of Heather or read her book is that you listen hard and think of questions that you might have. After the conversation, we are going to open it up to a 5 to 10 minute Q&A depending on how long we have. And so we really want to hear from you about questions that you have regarding how we can create an anti-racist future and some of the things that she brings up in her talk. So thank you so much. And with that, I will welcome to the stage Heather McGhee. And if for some reason there is a delay, we might hear some tunes from DJ Ome. So thank you so much, everyone, for coming. I'll see you a little bit later.
I'm sorry for being on time, so you don't get to hear DJ Ome. Thank you so much, Carrie, and to all the organizers at CTA and all the sponsoring organizations for putting this together, for creating a space, virtual though it may be, for us to dream together. As Carrie said, my name is Heather McGhee. I'm the author now of this new book called The Sum of Us: What Racism Costs Everyone and How We Can Prosper Together. And I wrote this book out of frustration. I left what was in many ways my dream job, running Demos, which was a think tank really in service of a broader progressive movement, because I felt like the tools that I had been equipped with as an economic policy person, data, statistical analysis, the white papers, the legislative testimony and legislative bill drafting, was insufficient to the task, that in fact, we often were being blocked by an iceberg that we were only seeing the tip of. And so I set out on this journey to go across the country multiple times over the course of 3 years. And that ended up resulting in The Sum of Us. And I've done a lot of interviews and podcasts and things about the book. And I encourage you guys to take a look at the book, to download it, to, obviously support your local bookstores, to downloading the podcast about it. I don't want to sort of do just a basic book talk here with this crew of fellow travelers. What I'd love to do is just talk a little bit about what compelled me to write it, what surprised me, what provoked me, and what I think the implications are now for the big ideas in the book. So the most agitational thing that happened in my research to write the book, which was really launched by digging deep into sociological research, which revealed that there is this zero-sum worldview, this view of racial relations that suggests that progress for one group has to come at the expense of the others. And specifically, that progress for people of color has to come at the expense of white people. And this is a majority opinion among white Americans across the country. It is a deeply held fear. There are so many different ways to kind of articulate it, whether it's fear about the changing demographics of the country, referred to as group status threat, but it really all comes down to knowing that there is a racial hierarchy in society and that some degree of security has come from being at the top of it. And that progress for people of color might mean that they would lose their status and therefore their security. Obviously, this is a story that is broadcast morning, noon, and night through conservative media. It is the organizing principle of Trumpism and has been the implicit organizing principle of the right wing for generations now. But what was agitational and provoking for me as I got a chance to sort of think quietly and more deeply than I was when I was, running a nonprofit, was that old maxim that you can't solve a problem from the consciousness that created it. And that we were trying to, in many ways, those of us who are fighting for economic and racial justice, fulfill what Dr. King called a revolution in values. And so we need to actually interrogate what parts of our own thinking, as we are people shaped by this society as well, what parts of our own thinking might actually be unreconstructed, might actually be reflecting the same paradigms that we are going up against. And so that's where a really agitational and provoking idea came to me, that in fact, maybe when we are so focused on the advantages of whiteness and the privileges of whiteness, we are actually thinking with the same paradigm as well. The idea that racism, this cruel, exploitative, inhumane force, can be totally good for some human beings and bad and totally bad for others. Doesn't that suggest a sort of massive separation, almost on a soul and spiritual level, that my deepest and most profound spiritual teachers would never agree with. Now, really much smarter people than I have talked about the way that, as I put it in the book, racism is a poison first consumed by its concoctors. Dr. King talked about the cost of segregation to everyone, Toni Morrison, James Baldwin, and yet I didn't feel like I had seen somebody really take this idea and drive it all the way to its logical conclusion. And so that agitation around really wanting to actually explode the paradigm of the zero sum and really test it and see if it's actually true that racist systems can concentrate their harms and their distortions and their poison only in the targeted community, and that there isn't any spillover from these zones for sacrifice and for harm and exploitation. And that therefore what we seek, justice, equality, fairness, is going to be something that white people should, in their own self-interest, fight to the death to guard against, which is actually sort of the logical continuation of this zero-sum idea. And it's what we have seen time and time again in American history. And that came up against the other thing that sort of launched me on the journey to write The Sum of Us, which was that I was just not convinced by the story that so many white progressive allies were telling about what had happened to the American economy. First and foremost, I had worked in economic policy on issues like student debt and poverty wages and the attack on collective bargaining and poor regulation of the financial markets and consumer laws. And it just seemed like the sort of economics only story that basically said, there were all these changes in our tax laws and our regulatory policy, in our labor laws and our trade laws that moved us from a society that had created the biggest middle class the world had ever seen in the middle of the 20th century to one of the most unequal societies in the developed world, quote unquote, was just insufficient. And so these two things really came together in a very, in a way that sort of pushed me out of the role that I was playing in the world and out onto the road. And what happened there was I discovered people and stories that helped illuminate for me a different way forward. A way forward that is embedded in values of mutualism and solidarity. And I began to call what I saw happening, obviously not broadly in our politics. This whole journey happened over the past 3 years under the Trump administration. But I saw pockets of it across the country, and I began to call it the solidarity dividend. And that's this idea that when we reject the zero-sum paradigm of racial competition, we can actually unlock gains that we cannot accomplish on our own. That the most important things in life, despite the sort of American mythology about rugged individualism, are actually things that I can't do on my own. I can't fund my kids' school better on my own. I can't clean up the air in my neighborhood on my own. I can't create a reliable electric grid on my own. I can't, as much as I recycle and reduce, I can't actually deal with greenhouse gas emissions on my own. The most important things that matter to us as a people and as a planet, we have got to do together. And this divide and conquer strategy of the elite has kept us unable to tap into our inherent collective power to solve the biggest problems that we face. I began to see how plutocrats had created the idea of race and racial difference and racial hierarchy, had created this zero-sum lie in order to justify the original economic model of this society: stolen people, stolen land, and stolen labor. And it was a sales job that was aimed at masses of white people who had a choice. Would they buy and settle for the psychological wages of whiteness and ally themselves with their race, or would they ally themselves with their class. And of course, as we know, we wouldn't have this society as unequal as it is today if they had not chosen and do not continue to choose to ally themselves with their race instead of their class. But my argument in the sum of us is that the economic benefit of the racial bargain is getting smaller and smaller. That the society that had, through massive public investments in housing, in infrastructure, in affordable education, in fact, free higher education, from the New Deal through to the GI Bill, created this massive middle class that was exclusively for white people, either by design in terms of the mortgage market and the exclusion of domestic and agricultural work from the New Deal's public protections, through to the GI Bill, which should have also helped hundreds of thousands of Black veterans, but did not because of segregation in the housing and education sectors. That project was a project that created a formula for more and more white Americans to have a decent standard of living. And it was a government ethos that I came upon this way of describing it that has ended up being useful, which is that throughout that period of time, there were all of these public goods and public protections and public investments. And one small symbol of that was the public pool. And these were not just any kinds of public pools. These were grand resort style pools that could hold thousands of swimmers at a time. And in the 1940s and 50s, the country had nearly 2,000 of them across the nation. But like all of those public benefits that I described, from the New Deal through to the GI Bill, they were often segregated and for whites only. And when the civil rights movement empowered Black Americans to say, those are our tax dollars funding those pools, we want our kids to swim too, towns across the country, and not just in the so-called segregated South, opted to drain their public pools rather than integrate them. So what did that mean? And why is that a relevant metaphor for what happened over the past 50 years since the civil rights movement? It meant that what was once a public good became a private luxury. It meant that something that had been an asset for the community, a place of belonging and community life, was completely eliminated. It meant that rich white families got to build backyard pools and have membership-only private swim clubs, but poorer white families had to go without. And then, of course, because racism always hits its target first and worst, it meant that Black families never got to swim at all. And that is something that we see to this day in the great disparities of how our young people are able to swim, often with life and death consequences. So why is the drained public pool a metaphor for the era of neoliberalism and austerity? Because in 1956 and 1960, the 2/3 of white Americans believed that the government, wait for it, ought to guarantee a job for everyone who wants one. A job guarantee. Nearly 70% in 1960 of white people believed that that should be the government policy, and a minimum standard income in the country. Between 1960 and 1964, the share of white Americans who believed in an income guarantee and a job guarantee fell in half to just 35%, and it stayed low ever since. Between 1960 and 1964, what happened? The March on Washington of 1963, where a job guarantee and a high living wage were two of the handful of demands that Black activists were organizing for, that was stated as part of the March on Washington for jobs and freedom. In 1963, President Kennedy went on a media campaign firmly associating the Democratic Party with civil rights. And of course, we know that his successor, Lyndon Johnson, would, after signing the Civil Rights and Voting Rights Acts, become the last president to ever, and Democratic presidential candidate to ever win the majority of the white vote, still to this day. In many ways, white Americans chose to turn their backs on the formula that had created broadly shared middle-class prosperity for generations of white, often ethnic immigrants because of racism. Here we are today in a country whose infrastructure used to be the envy of the world that now gets a D grade from the American Society of Civil Engineers. And yet, this conversation that we are having today is so timely and so important because there are cracks. There are cracks in the monolithic rejection of the public that is happening across the country. The pandemic has taught us that we are deeply vulnerable and deeply interconnected, that we need each other, and that, dare I say, we need government. We need government, and we need to government so much that we have to hold it to the highest standard of accountability. We need to refill the pool of public goods for everyone. And it's only through cross-racial organizing, which is what I saw in corners across this country, from Richmond in your backyard through to Lewiston, Maine, a dying mill town that's been revitalized by the presence of African Muslim refugees and immigrants, through to Kansas City, where a white fast food worker named Bridget told me, I used to believe the anti-immigrant stuff about them taking jobs and not paying taxes. And now I see that there's not an us and a them. For us to come up, they've got to come up too, because Bridget told me, as long as we're divided, we're conquered. There is a rising multiracial working class consciousness in this country that has put support for labor unions to an all-time high in many generations. It's put the support for the current organizing drive in Bessemer, Alabama, a right to work for less state, at Amazon, at one of their warehouses, at 77% approval among the American public. There is an organizing effort across this country and a consciousness that has come with it that rejects the politics of divide and conquer. It's a live fight. I want to be very clear. When you have $1.9 trillion in an American Rescue Plan bill come out of Washington and have the right wing choose to focus on Dr. Seuss, a pot of money for Black farmers, and a supposed panic at the border, it's very clear that they are doubling down on the zero-sum narrative. But with this window that we have, this window of opportunity in state legislatures and city councils across the country, and for this brief time, possibly in Washington, what are we going to do? How are we going to refill the pool of public goods together? How are we going to make the case that, in fact, an injury to one is an injury to all? That only through solidarity, through seeing the humanity in one another in this nation of so much human difference, can we actually achieve what I think is within our grasp, which is a permanent, durable, multiracial, majoritarian anti-racist coalition in this United States that was founded on a belief in a hierarchy of human value. Obviously, today, in many ways, our brightest ideas, our most fearless and impatient activists are coming from our youngest people. They have seen a generation of policy failures, of an unwillingness to solve our biggest problems or to even tackle them. They have seen relics of Jim Crow reach through time to strangle progress today for a multiracial America, and they are saying enough. I take from their optimism, their impatience, and their idealism so much hope and so much hunger for the world that is becoming. I'm really excited about the ways in which the idea that we can unlock solidarity dividends for everyone while never, ever losing sight of the fact that in a drained public pool, we are not all standing at the same depths, and that racism has held the pen as we have written most all of the laws and policies that shape opportunity and space and place in this country today. but the enormous amount of interest that there has been in reclaiming the history that has been stolen from us, both the struggle and the overcoming, gives me hope. Because only through organizing, through education, through agitation, and through being willing to deeply challenge even our most cherished ideas, can we really create a new world here in this land of many. Thank you. So I think that Carrie's going to come back on and we're going to do some questions.
I'm here.
Yeah.
Hi, Heather. Thank you so much. That was such an engaging conversation. And I really love this metaphor around the pool and draining the pool. It's captivating. And to me, it just sums up so much of the challenges that we currently have with public divestment and this move to privatize everything. So, your book and the way that you weave in and out of data and policy and these anecdotal stories with people whose names I remember and recall. It's just, excellent. And thank you so much for committing your, the last few years to doing this work. So we have one question that came in, and I think the audience is getting warmed up. So hopefully we'll get a few more questions, but I think this is a really great one. And so we'll start here. And it actually reminded me of the TED Talk that you did when you were speaking and sharing the story of meeting Gary, the caller who called into the radio station that you were on. And Gary admitted his prejudices and said he wanted to change. And then how you thanked him for that, expressed empathy, and you developed a relationship from that. So this idea of changing kind of hearts and minds. So the question that someone in our audience has is the calculation of the costs of racism. Oh, it's right there because we're fancy. The calculation, right? Go hop in. I'll just let you read it, and I'll speak it for those people actually. So the calculation of the cost of racism is so important. It's a very rational argument for reversing racist systems. But how do we change hearts and minds when racism is not rational?
Yeah. Really, in many ways, that's part of why I left the realm of the totally rational and economic policy and went into storytelling and trying to figure out, what are these deeper stories? I do believe, and I write in the book, that everything that we believe comes from a story we've been told. So what are the stories that are keeping us apart from one another, that are keeping us trapped in a zero-sum paradigm that truly no longer serves us and is costing us so much? Where do we see those stories played out day after day, both as we move through our neighborhoods and our communities, as we hear political debates, as we watch media coverage? And what are some examples of the stories that will invite us into a different paradigm? I really do believe in the power of storytelling to awaken consciousness and shift worldview. I just had a bunch of phone calls today, meeting with various folks who might work on one of my next projects, which is a podcast, which is digging deeper into the stories of cross-racial solidarity. So many that I came across that my editor wouldn't let me include in the book. There were just so many. So the podcast version, or the podcast sort of spinoff of The Sum of Us, will include some of the most memorable characters and places from the book, but also a whole bunch more. I mean, obviously so much has happened in this terrain of organizing and mutualism in the year of the pandemic that has asked so much of all of us, and where in many ways that was encouraging and surprising for someone who'd grown up, was born in under Ronald Reagan and had, experienced sort of what seemed like no limit to the sort of selfishness and worship of the market and the individual of Americans. And I'm not even just talking about Black folks, I mean, white folks here, to see how much many people were willing to leap into community and fill in the void that was being left by a corrupt and inept administration was just so heartening. And I want to tell more of those stories, talk about that it's great, right? Like lift it up as a goal to replicate across the country, but also talk about what's hard about it, right? It's not just hunky-dory Pollyanna when neighbors from different backgrounds get together and try to solve problems together, right? There are a lot of misunderstandings and stumbles and resentments, and people have to give things up, right? And people have to compromise. And I want to tell those stories in a way that hopefully can be illuminating of the America that we are becoming.
Excellent. Well, everyone warmed up. These questions are coming in now. So let's see here. And question from Olivia. What is a policy solution that you see has been underrated and deserves more attention from the activists and here?
Excellent. Olivia, thank you for that question. So my policy fantasy is that we have a massive public jobs program in America. And honestly, I do think that there's a lot of momentum behind it. In President Biden's executive order on climate, he directed the Secretary of Interior to issue a proposal about reanimating the Civilian Conservation Corps. There's obviously lots of Job Corps ideas in the Green New Deal, which is in the Thrive Act. There's Public Health Corps, right? Like there's already AmeriCorps that exists, but has a lot of limitations in a way. But really sort of wrapping all of that up in one streamlined, highly visible way for people from all over the country to know where to go, right? And have enough slots available for the demand that there is. For people who are right now, delivering food for DoorDash, but would really like to have more meaningful work rebuilding this country. Either it's hard infrastructure or it's human infrastructure or greening our infrastructure in our neighborhoods and communities, and do so, and this is specifically to this question of cross-racial solidarity, in a way that gets them out of their silos and neighborhoods and families where, whatever background we are limited because we are all so often segregated from deeply knowing people of different backgrounds, whether it's rural to urban, West Coast to South, whatever it is. That's just my fantasy, is that we could have this sort of generation defining effort for people to recommit to doing things in service of our country that doesn't involve killing people, but involves building up what we hold in common, those public goods, that care infrastructure, that green infrastructure, and doing so in a way that is transformational for, millions of people who participate in it.
That's powerful. I would respond, but I want to respect the audience and go to our next question. We have time for one more. You all did such a great job of bringing them in last time. I'll let you choose. How can we call out and transform dog whistles that are subtle and not so subtle lies about people of color?
Well, first of all, it's doing it, right? I mean, so often that's the power of dog whistling as a strategy, is that because if somebody says a dog whistle, you in defense and calling it out will be the first person to explicitly talk about race, right? Because the dog whistle is not about race, right? Quote unquote, right? It's about lazy people in the inner city. I didn't say Black. Why are you saying Black? Right? So that's part of the problem, is that jujitsu, as Ian Haney Lopez writes about in his book, Dog Whistle Politics, is one of the sort of built-in defense mechanisms, because it makes you the racist by saying race, right? By being the first one to say race. That can't work, right? That can't be enough. And so I think it's really important. You can qualify it, right? You can say like, if by that you mean blah, 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 right? To like guard yourself from having a bad faith debate about what the person meant, right? and I think that that's often useful, right? To sort of just bat down the stupid counter argument. But I think it's really important. My journey deep into the public opinion research and sociological studies in this conversation, in research for the sum of us, was very dispiriting about the extent and endurance of anti-Black stereotypes and anti-immigrant fears and indigenous erasure and all of that anti-Asian stereotypes and fears. So we have a lot of work to do, and calling it out in a way that offers a more expansive, holistic, and inclusive view of who we are as a people is always a fight worth waging. Thank you.
So I said one last question to that other one, but I feel like we might have time for one more. Is it okay, Heather? If
I think it's fine. I'm just seeing, I think they want you to end because it's 3:30.
Oh, that's fine. But I think this is such a special time. We'll just take one final one, and I think it's important, and I think you can probably speak to it relatively quickly. What can we as individuals do today and going forward to dismantle racism in our everyday lives?
Oh yeah, this is a quick one.
I know, right? 5 steps. Just link to your article or podcast, but maybe just give a few.
So I think individually we can choose in many ways an issue that is a vestige of systemic racism today, whether it's and thankfully there are so many to choose from, whether it's in housing or healthcare or education or in environmental pollution, and focus on really surfacing the ways that, as I said, racism really held the pen as those laws and policy structures were put into place, and use that as an organizing principle for dismantling them. And yet I believe, and I have seen it work across the country, that when we do it without falling into the zero-sum trap, we actually can build a larger coalition of people who see that it's not an either or, and that it is not in the self-interest of white Americans to continue to allow this country to be strangled by a right-wing plutocratic elite that wants to keep everybody, cut off from our potential as human beings and our potential as communities.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Heather. This is just tipping the iceberg. Heather's book, I have it right here. I just highly recommend it. I wasn't planning to do this book pitch, but I'm going to do it anyways because it's so amazing and phenomenal. And Heather, it's been a pleasure getting to meet you throughout this process. And thank you so much for the work you're doing. Everyone else, it's time. Go to your session. I'm sorry I'm running late. My team's going to be mad at me. You have an amazing day ahead of you. There are 6 sessions going on right now. Choose your track, find your program, and have a wonderful day. I'll see you shortly, and I'll be popping in various sections. Thank you so much. Bye.